All right, I think we're live. Push one in the chat if you can hear me. All right, got a confirmation from the chat. Thank you for the confirmation. Welcome back to the Black Brain Trust. This is episode 539, Black Pandemic Chat. Please hit the like button as you come in, share the video if possible, and hit that notification bell so you get all the updates from the Black Brain Trust, including those posted on the community tab. There's a document description beneath the video for you to follow along with. If you want to engage in the discussion, there'll be a link in the chat for you to click on. When you click on the link, make sure you raise your hand so that one of us can acknowledge you and advance you to the panel. Just as an FYI, there is a new Zoom update out that just came out, 5.0.3. Make sure you update your Zoom client before you get on the panel.
They gotta stop lying to the kids, man. Feeding them that same old bullshit. You know what I mean? Regurgitated crap. It's the meaning behind the sacred symbols. The goal behind the patience that makes it simple. For me to be the creator, I had to stay consistent. Knew that it would be greater later and stay persistent. When your moves about millions, you gotta run the maze. So get the hint, no disturbances when I'm running plays. Needs and wants the strongest traits of the human nature. Disconnections from it all, some say it's elevation. But fuck that, we getting rich for my peoples who was crucified, tortured, and lynched. I'm a product of kings and queens and gods and earths and slaves anonymous. Freedom or death is what we used to shout. So why we still throwing parties inside a burning house? The devil's still trying to turn us out. History repeats what you refuse to learn about. Accept your own and do for self. This life is all about health and wealth. My 12 jewels keep me focusing, yeah. I'm on my square. Acknowledge God that's seen and heard everywhere. Accept your own and do for self. This life is all about health and wealth. My 12 jewels keep me focusing, yeah. I'm on my square. Acknowledge God that's seen and heard everywhere. I probably move to Ghana, get into politics to restore the motherland and legalize marijuana. One for the ancestors, two for the rituals. The reincarnated energy from the spiritual crossroads that seems near me. My thoughts travel like string theory, which allows me to do my thing yearly. Unorthodox artist when I started was hella critics. I went from pimping and macking to using metaphysics. I'm on some Dr. Delbert Blair shit, dropping heavy. Science, word up, I even blew trees with Dr. Sebi. And that was around the same time I was copping heavy. Couple homies fell victim that was not respected. I'm still a factor in my section, studying lessons from the essence. The wisdom is the most precious. Sajad Allahu to the ones who know the hidden face that came from the west with new wine and golden scrolls. Accept your own and do for self. This life is all about health and wealth. My 12 jewels keep me focusing, yeah. I'm on my square. Acknowledge God that's seen and heard everywhere. Accept your own and do for self. This life is all about health and wealth. My 12 jewels keep me focusing, yeah. I'm on my square. Acknowledge God that's seen and heard everywhere.
right, get started with the first item on the docket. Let me give a shout out to the people who showed up first. Excalibur, salute. Nate, peace. Istiwa, peace and blessings to you. Kenny Konjo, salute to you as well. All right, Jackson J, peace. New Jersey Prophet, what up? Amari, what's going on? Mike Hamilton, what it do? What it do? All right, let me get started, man. This is from fastcompany.com. Copper masks are the latest craze. Should you buy one? We covered this last week, but I'll go into it a little bit more today. If you've been out of the hunt for a mask lately, you might have stumbled across one that contains copper. And if you're not dialed into the latest on microbial surfaces, this might raise some questions. Why copper? And is it worth spending the extra money? The answer is complicated. I have great hopes for copper masks, says Michael Schmidt, a professor of microbiology and immunology at the Medical University of South Carolina, who has studied the use of copper in medical products. But there is a lot of research that still needs to be done about effectiveness. If you're just throwing copper layers onto a mask, we don't know if they work. Here are some things to consider the next time you see a pop-up ad for a copper mask. Copper can destroy bacteria and viruses, as my colleague Mark Wilson recently reported. It contains positively charged ions that trap viruses that are negatively charged. Then the copper ions penetrate the viruses, stopping them from replicating. A recent study found that copper is effective at inactivating the novel coronavirus within 4 hours. Historically, copper has been used in hospital doorknobs and IV stands to curb the spread of illness. It has also been used in fabric. Schmidt points to an innovator in this space, Virginia-based Cupron, which invented a copper-infused fabric more than a decade ago. These fabrics have been made into bed sheets and pillowcases in hospitals. Microbiologist Phyllis Kuhn was another early advocate of using copper in hospitals. She developed a mask made from 99.95% copper mesh, which she sells on her website for $25. Now, as coronavirus has swept across the planet and forced more people to wear masks, more companies are thinking about incorporating copper into masks. Companies like shoe startup Adams, the futon shop, and an Israeli tech company called Argaman have all started selling copper masks, which cost between $10 and $70 a pop. These fabrics have been around for some time. It's just COVID that makes it new. Again, Schmidt says, Cupron, for instance, has started making cloth masks that contain a mix of cotton fibers and polyester blended with cotton, although they are not available for individual purchase. Last week, the University Hospitals of Cleveland Medical Center brought $25,000 for employees. Daniel Simon, the chief clinical and scientific officer of UHC MC, says that N95 and surgical masks are being reserved for workers caring for confirmed COVID-19 patients. Meanwhile, the copper mask will be worn by all other employees. We believe copper masks are more effective at protecting our workers than a simple cloth mask because the copper in them kills germs. Right now, most copper masks on the market aren't respirators, like the N95 mask, which creates a perfect seal around the wearer's face. Instead, they are looser fitting cloth masks, which allow particles to enter through gaps in the side. These masks aren't designed for people who are at high risk of being exposed to to those with COVID-19. Instead, they are designed to be an improvement on cloth masks that the CDC recommends people wear in public to curb the spread of the coronavirus. If a wearer is infected, virus-laden droplets that come out of their mouth or nose and land on the mask will be killed off in a matter of hours. On a cloth mask, they could live on the material for several days. In other words, these masks are designed to be more hygienic. As the viral particles go out of you through the copper mask into the environment, they will die, says Schmidt. There are some benefits for wearer as well. For instance, Kupron's chief medical scientist says one way the virus could be transmitted is if someone touches an infected surface like a doorknob, then touches their mask to adjust it. In this situation, the copper in the mask would kill these viruses, whereas they would linger on a traditional cloth mask, potentially contaminating the wearer. The outside of the mask can pick up the virus, Schmidt says. You can pick it up with your fingers, rub your eye, pick your nose, lick your finger, and voila, you're contaminated. However, the effectiveness of the mask depends on how much copper is in it. Schmidt says virus particles are very small, so they would need to actually encounter the copper to be deactivated. The best copper mask would have copper incorporated into every fiber, rather than just on one single layer embedded inside the mask. Can they be washed? One benefit of copper masks is that they are washable. While the specific details of washability vary, many copper masks, including Kupron's and Phyllis Kuhn's, can be washed repeatedly without reducing their efficiency. This is one reason that some hospitals like UHCMC are so eager to get their hands on them. It's hard procuring new PPE at a time when there is a global shortage, says Simon. With these copper masks, our workers can keep them for years and they will be just as effective. Should you buy a copper mask? Schmidt says that if a copper textile has been scientifically evaluated, it could be an improvement on the average cloth mask. The problem is that most copper masks on the market haven't been studied. So that's the gist of all of this. They do have a point. Let me advance so many people that are waiting. They do have a point that copper is used in hospitals to reduce the spread of infection of surface-based bacteria. That being said, I think an improvement on the mask would be to electrically charge it. Imagine if the mask had a small micro battery on it, a nano battery on it to charge it, in the same way you would charge or illuminate the fibers within the mask itself to kill the bacteria almost instantly instead of hours, right? It should kill it instantly. We have the Golden 11 on the panel. What's going on, man?
Hey, what's going on, Mike?
No, man.
What's going on, fellas? What's going on there?
Yeah, long time no see, man. So New Jersey Prophet asked a question. Let me see. It says, we believe, is the information confirmed or not? No one's been able to verify this because no one's been able to test it. I mean, you have to find some bacteria and put it on the mask to see if it works or not. In this instance, I don't know. This is so exclusive, no one really knows.
Well, if it hasn't really been proven, then I would always leave it in the realm of doubt. Maybe it will, maybe it won't, but it hasn't been proven, so you're taking a risk.
Yeah. New Jersey Prophet asked in the chat, what did that heat the mask up to a certain point over time? So he's asking in reference to the point that I made earlier about the mask should have a micro battery attached to it that actually electrifies the mask and kills the bacteria instantly. And Nate A kind of confirms my thought that he says UVC light destroys viruses without side effects allegedly. Yeah, that's the point that I was getting to. That's my understanding of it. Okay. I mean, they do make very small batteries now, like the same measure as tape. And, that can last a long time. So if you're going to wear it over and over and over, then you should be able to do that. But even if it was like a watch battery, at the, on the side of a mask is not that difficult to integrate. But this makes me wonder about what's the value of copper right now. So let's do a Google search on copper. What is it going for in the market? Let's go to investing.com. We'll look up copper. Yeah, we'll look up copper futures. So copper is on the up. It's not. It's not that much, but it is on the up. So as these masks keep getting produced, you're going to start to see the market increase with these things. So I would definitely, would be investing into copper at this point. So. All right, this next one is from fastcompany.com again. Masks prevent the spread of COVID-19, landmark analysis of 64 studies finds. As the US healthcare system has been battling shortages of surgical masks, N95 respirators, and face shields, one lingering question has remained. Does all this PPE actually prevent someone from contracting COVID-19, especially someone who is tasked with caring for COVID-19 patients day after day during long shifts in hospitals? A new study out of Oregon Health and Science University, funded by the World Health Organization, has confirmed what much of the medical community has assumed. Yes, even surgical masks, which are not designed to filter particles from the air you breathe in, appear to make significant reductions in the number of doctors and nurses infected by coronaviruses in clinical settings. Meanwhile, N95 respirators, which are designed to filter pathogens, along with full protective gear, including face shields and gloves, may help even more. The paper, led by Roger Chow, director of the Pacific Northwest Evidence Based Practice Center at OHSU and a professor of medicine in the OHSU School of Medicine, was a meta-study that analyzed the results of 64 separate studies about the impact of PPE on virus transmission. They date back to 2003 with the rise of SARS, account for data on MERS, and even included a few early studies on SARS-CoV-2. We were trying to take the evidence from viruses that we thought would be most like COVID-19, Chow says, noting that all of the analyzed studies examined novel coronaviruses which cause similar upper respiratory symptoms. The conclusion, PPE definitely did seem to help, he says. In terms of the impact in general, if you look at the individual healthcare workers using mask versus no mask, the risk of being infected drops by anywhere from 50% to 80%. Masks consistently cut infection rates across the studies, leading Chow to believe that anything from a surgical mask to an N95 reduces the risk of transmitting coronavirus viruses. Which mask reduce COVID-19 infections most effectively? The meta study does not provide a definitive answer because there was little consistency in the types of mask research and the exact circumstances they were researched in. There are some studies that compare the N95 to surgical masks, and those studies do seem to indicate that an N95 might reduce risk more than a surgical mask, he says. Similarly, Chow suggests that the more types of PPE you stack on top of yourself, like masks, gloves, face shields, and so on, the better. But the data is not clear cut as it is for wearing a mask versus not wearing a mask. So I'm not going to read any more into this because I think this is pretty self-explanatory. Lugon, you have anything you want to add to that?
I would say so masks do help, is what they're saying. Is that correct?
Yeah, based on the study from 2003 to now.
Yeah, it would make sense. I would think that a mask would definitely be helpful. Did they say anything about gloves? That's another thing
gloves.
too. You know,
Gloves.
Gloves
Anything that's PPE would help reduce it.
Okay, and eye goggles.
Yeah, shields.
Shields. Okay.
Anything that's PPE.
All right.
So if you want to walk around with a shield on your face, you know, go right ahead.
I'll wear one just to stay out of trouble. I have no problem, no shame whatsoever. So I will definitely wear it.
Yeah, I wouldn't be surprised you start seeing guys running around with tinted masks.
Nah. In fact, this girl from my gym, she actually is she's selling masks now that have these different designs on them. I don't know if the designs will compromise the masks. I don't know, but that's what she's doing.
Women always got their mask on, so I've heard.
Yes, they do.
All right. Let me get to the next item on the docket. Wired.com. The first shot inside the COVID vaccine fast track. This is what. Expand this out. Neil Browning walked into the waiting room. He took in the reception desk, the play area for kids, table full of magazines that he was too cautious to touch. There was another patient waiting, a woman in her 40s with brown chin-length hair. Browning wasn't sure whether she was here for the same historic reason that he was, so he decided to follow standard waiting room procedure and sat quietly, no conversation, no eye contact. After a few minutes, a nurse called the woman back and he watched her disappear behind the door. A few minutes passed and it was his turn. What the fuck is this? First, there were questions. Still no fever, still no contact with anyone who's been sick. Then there was a round of blood draws. Browning, a 46-year-old network engineer, had taken the morning off from his job at Microsoft, where he'd been unusually busy for weeks. His team was following the spread of a deadly new virus around the world, preparing firewalls and VPNs to allow a global workforce to suddenly start working from home. The engineers trailed the virus from Wuhan to the rest of China, to Europe, and to his own doorstep in Washington State. 18 days before he walked into the waiting room, a teenager who lived 10 miles from Browning's house in Bothell, Washington, had tested positive for the new virus. The teen hadn't traveled abroad or had known contact with anyone with a positive case. Browning wrote on his Facebook that Pandora's box had been opened. The next day, officials announced that the first person in the United States had died from the virus at a hospital just 5 miles from Browning's house. A few days later, when a friend texted Browning with news that a group of researchers were looking for volunteers to test a possible new vaccine, he marveled at how quickly the vaccine had appeared, but didn't hesitate to sign up. The researchers got in touch asking to check his blood and his medical background. Browning started Googling viruses, vaccines, RNA, DNA, so many details on his own biology, to which he hadn't spared a thought since an introductory science class back in college. He talked with his fiance and his mother, both of whom are registered nurses, about the risk of offering himself as a test subject. There was a chance he'd have a bad reaction to the shot. The theoretical possibility that the vaccine might make his body produce antibodies that actually made the virus worse, and simply the inherent risk of unknowability associated with the brand new. Still, to Browning, the risk seems low when compared with the known danger. On the news, he watched as deaths mounted at the nearby nursing home as the governor shut down concerts and then schools and then businesses. Now the moment was here, and he had no doubts, only hopes. Browning watched as his veins filled filled vial after vial, each of them a vicious record of what his body was like now in its before state. Then it was time for the shot. It took a few awkward tugs for the pharmacist to get the sleeve up of Browning's blue-collared shirt above his deltoid. But that was the only drama visible for anyone to see. The needle slid in, the needle slid out, a news camera clicked, 25 micrograms of fluid, the first and fastest hope for stopping a pandemic that had been officially declared just 5 days before, diffused into the muscle of his right arm. To Browning, it felt like a big nothing. That's what it looked like too. He pulled his sleeve back down. The pharmacist disposed of the syringe. From this moment on, any action would be invisible, hidden away inside Browning's arm, where the dermatitis personae were proteins and cytokines, T cells, and B cells. In the exam room, where he was asked to wait an hour to make sure there was no immediate adverse reaction, Browning sent some text, messed around on his phone, and tried to imagine what might be going on inside him. Right now, as far as he could tell, the answer seemed to be not much out of the ordinary. It was entirely possible that this would prove true, that nothing much would happen. This very first human trial of a vaccine designed to fight SARS-CoV-2, the newly emerged coronavirus that was disrupting the world, could lead to a disappointment, just like so many trials for so many other vaccines for so many other diseases. To make a successful vaccine, to test its safety and effectiveness, and to get it licensed for a widespread use in healthy humans, it's usually a long and arduous process. Development commonly takes a decade or more. Historically, for any given attempt, the statistical chance of failure is 94%. But Browning was an optimist. He knew that the vaccine candidate now in his arm had made it there in record time. Instead of years, the time scale was measured in days. Just 66% of them had passed since the genome of the virus had first been published. Maybe more records were possible. He lay on the exam table in hope fervently that at the gates of his cells, something big was beginning. Across a panicked world, anybody who saw the day's news that the first human beings had been injected with a vaccine meant to fight the virus that seemed to be changing everything had to hope the same. Please, we pleaded, as businesses shuttered and families stayed apart and ambulance sirens wailed. Please, as people risked their lives in ER and grocery stores. So, yeah, I'm not going to read the rest of this because we don't have a whole lot of time, but I don't know much about this. I'm pretty sure somebody like Dr. Phoenix could probably speak to this, but you know, these sort of beta vaccines, you know, these sort of shots in the dark. I don't know.
Well,
94% failure rate. I don't know.
yeah, I think these beta vaccines, I know the shots in the dark, that's what I think they are. Or shots in the dark, some can work, so some may not. But a friend of mine sent me a video with this black doctor, and his daughter was interviewing him. And he traveled around the world a great deal. He was a surgeon, but he was also a very highly skilled epidemiologist, really understands the disease. He's been throughout Africa, Asia, all over the world dealing with rather kind of some exotic diseases and so forth. And she basically had about a 32-minute interview with him. This was her father. And she interviewed him, and he basically broke down the COVID virus. And, it's an RNA-based virus, highly mutagenic and so forth. What he basically was breaking down was the fact that there are two strains of this virus right now that's active here in the United States that they've said that they've isolated. Mm-hmm. And the second strain of this virus that's out here now, since the virus is mutagenic and it has mutated, he thinks there are about 12 different variations of this virus out now, but he says there are 2 here in the United States. Some people have actually been infected with both. So he was starting to get into that. Now this is an MD, a very serious doctor. This is not some joke around here, just popping out the side of his neck. Mm-hmm. He's out here, dealing with this on a regular consistent basis. Has patients, people who he's dealing with. So he spoke in very cogently and in some detail about the virus, kind of how it affects you and what it actually is doing, and why a vaccine that he's talking about right now that might work for one may not be very good for the other, may not actually give you good enough treatment for the other strain that's out there, or maybe some of the other strains that might start to come over. And he said by how things look right now, and how they're opening up the country and everything else like that, they're starting to do some of this right now, which he thinks is definitely not the move, but he understands exactly why people are doing. He figures that mostly everyone's going to get it, and he is saying that a herd immunity will play somewhat of a role, but the second virus is going to be this new strain is kind of tough, and it's infecting different kind of people now. So now it's infecting younger people and actually able to affect babies and so forth, where the other one was not as prevalent in doing that. So this one seems to be more efficient at being able to hit some of the groups that it wasn't really efficient at hitting previously. So it's mutating like that, and this looks to be a very serious deal. So when we're talking about all this PPE and all that we're doing, that's going to be on for a while. He said we won't see ourselves really coming clear of this for the next 2 to 3 years. He said about that's what we're looking at, and we're looking at really a lot more people potentially dying from this. So he didn't want to get into all the super horrors of keep opening the country and people walking around and not social distancing and folks not being tested, because he thinks some of the tests right now, especially with the new virus, may not show up that well. So they have to even get better at testing, and said that you need to be tested just not once and say you're clear, but you need to be tested 3 to 4 times a year, 3 to 4 times.
They're saying I've seen some cases where they're saying daily, because it may not show today, but tomorrow it may show up.
Yeah. I mean, so he's saying that at least 3 to 4 times a year that you need to be tested. So daily, that may be the case, but realistically, that's not going to happen.
But it depends on what kind of test kits they can come up with. I mean, if they're talking about test kits that you can go to a vending machine and pick up or something like that may very well be the case.
That very well may be, but we're not seeing any of that as of yet. It'd be great if we did have that, and the medical industry being kind of rapacious as it is, looking for profits and so forth. They're going to try to, make as much money as they can on that. That's why, we should have a socialized system and the whole deal with respect to medical care. I'm not saying overall, the whole overall economy, but that would make a lot more sense for saving people. But I don't, there's a whole other question about people or profits. It's a whole other game as well. But here we are with more than one strain active right now. Why some people have 15% of people who have been cured, let's say, or have gotten over their first infection, they've coming down with secondary infections. And that's 15% of people who have been cured. 15% are getting it again. And it's that second strain that's getting up in there. So if you had it once, that first strain seemed like you had it once, is not giving you a lot of great protection from getting reinfected by another strain. So and this thing is mutating as we speak. So this thing so shit's getting ready to go Hollywood with this. And we really need to protect ourselves as best as possible. And he's talked about what you needed to actually wash with. And he said soap and water is not as effective as you might think. It isn't. And he said, what really you need to really clean this virus off is with alcohol. If you don't have a soap called HybaCleanse, of which I've seen before, it's in a green bottle. I've seen it like my gym and some of the places had this before, and I would see it in the bottle. But a lot of people are not even aware of what this is. But it has antibacterial, antiviral properties that will help to knock out that that lipid layer that is on top of this virus that protects it, where that'll break that down pretty quickly and knock it out fast, kind of like how you might irradiate something else like that, which would not melt it away instantaneously. Something like this helps to burn it away or melt it away. And you can wash this off. He was talking about the nature of how this virus is. It has a lot of spikes and a lot of grappling hooks on it, if you will. So it sticks to you. So it's not sticks to your clothes, sticks to your face, it sticks to your skin. It's not easy to get off. So this thing is designed to stick and hold. And that's what it does. It does that same thing in the body. It gets inside of the body and it gets inside of organs as opposed to on top of it. It goes inside of your organs. And it locks inside of your body, so your body has to fight it from there. So that's what makes it relatively dangerous, and how it has some of the long-term side effects and organ damage because of the nature of how this virus actually locks in and adheres. So it's got nasty barbs and hooks that it just locks in on you. So so I just wanted to say that this is kind of the nature of the virus, and you have two strains. So it's not just one strain, it's two. So and there are about 12 out there that he says, but this is what we're dealing with currently. So so this is going to be with us for a while. It looks like. I don't, how virulent it will be, I don't know, but if crowd or herd immunity will take place, that will help us outside of a vaccine. So will we have a successful enough vaccine to really work and do the kind of work that we're looking to do? We could be a ways off it, because the first vaccine that we may have may not be good enough for what this other strain is, or other strains that might be currently mutating right now to treat this. So I just, I got this information and I was, pretty taken aback, but that's kind of what we're dealing with right now.
All right, let's go to Dr. Phoenix. Dr. Phoenix, what's going on, brother?
How you brothers doing tonight?
All right.
Phoenix, what's up, man? I'm just giving a little breakdown here, man. Please.
Yeah, no. I mean, that was very well explained. I think to the article Mike was reading, and to what you were saying as well, Nago, one thing to keep in mind is that most drugs and vaccines fail in clinical trials. So we're looking at a failure rate of somewhere around 90 to 86%. So roughly about 14% of all drugs, vaccines actually make it out of clinical trials into actual development. And so essentially, this is part of where you think about how medicine and pharmaceuticals get monetized, and they get really this real big capitalist push, because again, most drugs take a minimum of 10 years to come to market. So all the drugs that we use now, these drugs were in development back in the 90s, even the 80s in some cases.
Mhm.
And so the average cost to bring a drug or even a vaccine to market can run at the low end around 100 million, at the high end billions of dollars. And so there's always going to be, unfortunately, because of the way the medical system in this country is designed, there's always going to be a fundamental push for profits over actual dealing with health issues that people face, and even just disparities as a result, because people can't afford these drugs. I mean, you think about some of the new drugs on the market now, with some of the drugs that they're talking about now to use to fight COVID-19. Many of them are new drugs themselves, such as the new ones like some of the new hepatitis C drugs that are actually offer a 100% cure rate for hepatitis C. Those drugs are only about 3-4 years in on the market. And so you think about these drugs fundamentally, there's always drugs in the pipeline. There's always something in development.
Yep.
And so that's something that people need to understand, that for all these drugs that fail, remember there's hundreds more that are being designed as we speak, thousands.
Yep.
And so I agree with everything that Nagone said, what the doctor was saying. Yeah, we're looking at the fact that we're dealing with a virus it is an RNA virus, and like all RNA viruses, highly susceptible to mutation, because RNA in of itself is very unstable, unlike DNA, because it does not have a double helix structure. So it's a single strand. So therefore it's more prone to degradation, which is part of the problem. When you study RNA in a laboratory setting, it degrades rapidly, very rapidly. So it's very hard to maintain, and even in a laboratory setting. And therefore, for viruses that are RNA based, like chickenpox and obviously COVID and stuff like that, they are very prone to mutation.
Mhm.
And so this will certainly explain. This will certainly be one explanation as to why you're seeing people who are some of the stories we've been seeing over the past few months of people who have been allegedly reinfected, or who were once cured, but now they tested positive again. And so that would certainly explain a lot of what was going on, and certainly would be my hypothesis, is that you're seeing this virus mutate in real time, and it also explains some of the really weird stuff that we're seeing happening in children now. There's been a lot of case studies and stories popping up over the past month or so, showing very weird stuff happening in children with Kawasaki's disease. If anyone's not familiar with that, very rare condition, where the telltale sign of it in children is a strawberry tongue. Basically, if they stick their tongue out, their tongue is very pinkish reddish, like a strawberry color. And that in turn causes a lot of issues with the vascular system in children. And so so we're seeing a lot of stuff with skin rashes, very severe skin rashes, even in not children, but even young adults, we're seeing severe thrombolytic disorders. So
Yep.
folks who are experiencing severe clotting, pulmonary emboli.
Okay.
So I mean, certainly what we're seeing here is that, if you ask me, this virus, I don't want to kind of go into the weeds with stuff, but there's a lot of weird stuff going on here.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah.
think fundamentally, just to even explain it, based on what I know, and just based on in general, again, this virus has had potentially millions of years to mutate and operate, and now it would appear to be the perfect virus.
There's a question in the chat from Ms. J. Ms. J asked a question. So it's going to end up like a super horrific flu, which changes every season. That's to you, Dr. Mills.
I would say this virus operates very much like not the flu necessarily, but pneumonia. It's pretty much what this virus gives people, and what ultimately kills people is a severe chronic pneumonia. And so that's the fundamental problem, is that it operates and infects, it very much resembles the flu, but the way it actually operates within the body is pretty much a pneumonia. It's a think of it as a severe chronic pneumonia that just doesn't go away, and no matter how much you try to breathe, no matter how much oxygen we give you, no matter if we intubate you and put you on a ventilator, we just cannot get enough air into your lungs, and that's ultimately what kills people, is just severe hypoxemia with acid with respiratory acidosis.
Respiratory acidosis. Absolutely. You know, it seems to function, and like this doctor said, a lot more like AIDS. He started to speak about that.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would definitely agree with that.
And what I was wondering is what type of reverse transcriptase blockers or whatever that might use to really keep the virus at bay from really kind of getting into the cell and being able to replicate. Those types of agents. I'm wondering if we can further develop on top of that. That's kind of how I'm thinking. Maybe something like this could be hit a little easier for the short term before we come up with a. They're saying some of these age drugs work. Or are they getting some results from that? It seems that's why they say it's kind of interesting. But Dr. Phoenix, you have any views on that, or I don't know, just a question I'm throwing out.
I mean, right now, because this virus seems to exhibit the traits of numerous types of viruses that we know of, not just the initial coronavirus that we know of back in the early 2000s, with that took place, that was in China as well, or even another version of it that was in the Middle East back in 2007, 2008, which was a Middle East respiratory syndrome, which was also called by a version of coronavirus. I mean, it operates, it exhibits traits of the flu, definitely pneumonia, certainly seems to replicate very much like AIDS. Specifically, it seems to attach very much to the ACE2 receptors.
Yep.
And something, anyone's not familiar with that, that's the angiotensin converting receptor, so ACE2. Men tend to have more ACE2 receptors, which will also somewhat explain why more men are being infected and at a higher rate, and also dying at a higher rate from COVID-19 than women. So I mean, I think right now, we ain't got no choice but to kind of throw the kitchen sink, because no one doesn't truly understand. However, what I would say this is that the only way, the way that this virus infects or seems to just do massive damage in the body, because there's a lot of studies coming out now that show that there's severe permanent damage to the lungs, and many folks who have even recovered from the virus, not just to lungs, but to the cardiovascular system. In men, we're looking at testicular damage, potentially kidney, especially kidney damage, because this is where a high proportion of the ACE2 receptors are at.
Why does it go after you said testicular?
Yeah.
Why does it go after that?
We're not entirely sure, but many men infected with COVID-19 have experienced testicular damage.
So, Dr. Phoenix, I just wanted. So you're saying it also affects the RAAS system, renin, angiotensin, aldosterone.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
So I mean, we're looking at
and that has a big effect on the kidneys as well. That's going to affect with the kidneys as well.
I mean, because again, this is why one of the principal factors that predisposes people to severe complications of coronavirus is hypertension. Because the RNA system, ACE2, is principally responsible for regulating blood pressure within the body.
That's correct. This is correct.
And so folks who have issues with high blood pressure are the ones I would say this is your population that is most at risk.
And diabetics, they seem diabetics seem to be getting
because
cold.
because diabetics, the way diabetes affects the body, most people just think of diabetes of, oh, you just got high blood sugar. No, blood glucose runs through every vascular part of the body. Period. It runs through every vessel within the body. So that includes vessels within your eyes. This is why most diabetics eventually experience permanent eye damage or many go blind. But also in general, many diabetics ultimately develop heart issues, so atrial fibrillation, which is a regular heartbeat that can lead to stroke. But in general, why so many folks, the principal signs and symptoms of people who start to experience complications of diabetes start where? In the feet. Because these are the parts of the body that are furthest away from the heart, also where blood travels, where you're most likely to have issues with blood return. And because you cannot get enough perfusion into the part of the body, to those parts of the body, and because of diabetes, this is why, in particular, diabetes is so deadly for folks who may be. This is why COVID-19 will be so deadly to folks, because it's not a disease that's not just characterized by high sugar, high blood glucose within the vascular system, within your blood vessels, but specifically it affects every single vessel in the body. Period.
All right, let me get to this next article.
No.
This is from NPR.org. A few schools reopen, but remote learning could go on for years in the U.S. May 7th is the date that Montana Governor Steve Bullock, a Democrat, declared it was safe to open up schools. The state has had fewer than 500 reported cases of coronavirus as of this week. This is a couple weeks ago. But according to the state's Office of Public Instruction, just a few school districts in small towns have taken the governor up on the offer. That gap between a state executive proclaiming schools okay to open and the reality of tiny groups of students gathering in just a few schools shows the logistical challenges educators and state officials around the country face in any decision to reopen. Willow Creek Schools in Three Forks, Montana, is opening its doors and expects a few dozen of its 56 students to show up. Troy, a northwestern Montana town, is holding limited and voluntary study hall visits, focusing on special education students as well as some outdoor activities. The town of Glasgow says it will open its schools on a limited basis to students without devices. Libby, a town of fewer than 3,000 people, is allowing students to come back to the single middle high school to meet face-to-face with teachers for what amounts to targeted tutoring sessions. They can sign up for an appointment to get help in a subject they are struggling with. Craig Barringer, the superintendent of Libby Schools, said that educators made this decision based on surveying parents. When it came to elementary school students, the parents felt they were more able to handle them or more able to help them. Not so at more advanced academic levels. When you get to even 7th grade math, parents can't give the assistance that they need if they really get stuck. There's a long list of precautions being taken. Barringer says students will be greeted at the door. They'll be encouraged to wear masks. They'll put up hand sanitizer stations. We have breaks in between scheduled appointments so we can clean and air out the smell of cleaner. Public schools play a range of roles in society beyond education. They child care for millions of working parents. They are a cornerstone of any attempt to reopen the economy. They are hubs for community relationships and distribution points for essential social services. But before any of that, they must be safe places for children. With those various functions in mind, education leaders are putting out plans that forecast some very big changes to what public school might look like in the coming months and even years. The complications of leading to a patchwork effect and a disconnect between levels of government in many places. In California, Governor Gavin Newsom, a Democrat, talked about trying to open up for summer school as soon as July. But school leaders in Palo Alto and Sacramento countered that it would be more likely that they'd have to push the start of the school year later by a few weeks because of all the planning necessary to open up safely. In Georgia, even as Governor Brian Kemp, a Republican, has been out ahead of the rest of the country on opening up some businesses, there are a few districts that chose to end the school year early, putting an end to the efforts with remote learning. In Washington, D.C., public schools have also decided to end school year early, pledging to tack those weeks back on by starting early in August. In Washington State and in Chicago, leaders have acknowledged that some of the remote learning might continue off and on through the 2020-2021 school year and even beyond. In the past few days, American Federation of Teachers, the nation's second largest teachers union, put out a detailed blueprint for reopening. And so did the American Enterprise Institute, the conservative think tank, which asked retired state superintendents, city chancellors, and other school leaders to weigh in. These two plans have a lot in common as far as in basic medical recommendations: the need for rapid and repeated coronavirus testing of students and staff, contact tracing, stepped up hygiene and cleaning, and reducing class sizes to allow for social distancing. Here are the four tough problems that are on experts' minds. Running remote and in-person learning in parallel, serving the neediest and traumatized kids, privacy, transportation. So these sort of aspects, we've talked about this many times before, that this is a disaster to actually do something like this without testing anybody. Just having people just roam around untested. I don't know. I don't know what they're thinking. We read an article yesterday about Motorola and a couple other companies actually coming up with solutions to use their camera, their surveillance footage to actually map people out who's not social distancing and so on and so forth. Some of the technologies that's already embedded in corporate America could actually be trickled down to the public sector. So I think there's some ways that we can leverage technology to actually enable this sort of effort. But if you're not testing anybody, what's the point? Or if you haven't tested everybody, what's the point? I think until you can test 90 to 95% of the people, I don't think you should reopen anything.
Asking for a major problem, man. This is asking for a disaster. This is the master of disaster. As I already said, Westchester County Public Health, in their physical plant area, they are already. My understanding is now, from what my brother tells me, they've I think made about an extra 3,000 pine boxes. So when you ask boxes out behind this shit, they gonna throw you. They got a box for you to throw your ass in. So people are already prepping for round two. Prepping for.
Yeah, because you have a lot of I've heard this several times. I'll put your ass in the pine box, put a hot one in you. Well, now that's coming to reality. They're making these pine boxes,
and they're actually building the pine boxes.
Yeah. Let me jump to this next item on the docket. This is from sfgate.com. 90% of people who tested positive for COVID-19 in Mission District study had one thing in common. Interesting. In a major testing effort led by UC San Francisco in the Mission District, 2.1% of the 4,100 people tested for COVID-19 were positive. Of those who tested positive, 90% reported being unable to work from home. 90% of the people who were PCR positive had no capability of working from home during the shelter in place. These were frontline workers. They had to work outside of the home, either that or they were furloughed or unemployed. Dr. Diane Havler, chief of the UCSF Division of HIV Infection and Global Disease at San Francisco General, told KCBS 95% of positive individuals were of Latinx heritage. The COVID-19 pandemic is disproportionately affecting the Latinx community in San Francisco, both in terms of infection rates and economic hardship. And we have been partnering very closely with the Latino Task Force for COVID-19 to support this community by working to disrupt transmission of the disease. Dr. Karina Marquez, an assistant professor of medicine at UCSF, said from April 25th to April 28th, free voluntary COVID-19 testing was offered to every resident in a 16 block area running from Cesar Chavez to 23rd Street in South Van Ness to Harrison Street. This is the second most dense area of the city, and a little over half of the residents living here were tested. While turnout for the study was considered a success, researchers said those people who didn't access testing feared being tracked by the government agencies and the potential negative impact on local businesses if the neighborhood is branded a COVID-19 hotspot. Some also were afraid of the potential consequences of isolation if they tested positive. Researchers conducted 2 types of tests to identify those individuals who are currently infected and those who previously had the virus. The diagnostic test for active COVID-19 was implemented by collecting samples with nasal swabs, while the antibody test was done with a finger prick to collect a blood sample. Results were available within 72 hours. People who tested positive received immediate follow-up calls from UCSF infectious disease experts, while those who test negative are expected to continue following the shelter-in-place order because of the possibility of false negative test results and a general lack of information about the potential of reinfection with the disease. In a preliminary statement released on the study results, UCFS said, the results are so far suggested that those who are at the highest risk for infection are those who cannot easily shelter in place due to job loss, furloughs, or because they are providing the essential services. Among those who tested positive, 90% of work reported being unable to work from home. In contrast, among those who tested negative, 53% reported no impact on their work or financial stability. Nearly 89% of those who tested positive earn less than $50,000 a year, and most live in households of 3 to 5 people or larger. Notably, people who lived outside the census tract but who go there for work were much more likely to test positive than residents. The study is meant to reveal the invisible spread of the virus and help inform future testing efforts in other communities. So, yeah, this was bound to happen. I mean, Dr. Phoenix, myself, have gone on record back in December talking about this, about the impact of this on Black and brown people. And many people have scoffed at us and said, we don't know if this is real. We don't know, it's government conspiracy. It was made in some chamber somewhere. Now it's real. Where are those people at now? And so I'm glad that they're doing the testing for a 16 block radius, but there are other places where they have not done any testing. They open it right back up, and it's going to come back like a boomerang and hit them right in the ass. Whoever's in leadership will be finished the next go around when it comes to an election. So let me advance this for the person.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree, brother.
Mm-hmm.
To the other article you read, the previous article you read before this one,
Mm-hmm.
This is mind-boggling. They said they're going to reopen the schools. They're going to think about holding in-person classes. Look, pretty much every school system that I've looked at in this country so far, it is fairly clear that online education, some online format of educating kids and students, excuse me, that's going to be the way going forward, at least to the end of this year, at least. Now, this silly idea, well, we only have 500 or so confirmed cases. Well, the problem is, of course, the cases are confirmed, but if you're not testing people, how do you really know who has it, who's infected, who has been infected?
I
You
mean,
know,
it's ridiculous.
And then you couple that with the fact that they said, well, we're going to make recommendations that students wear masks. We're not going to tell them to be here, you have to wear masks. No, we're just going to recommend it because, of course, this is America, and you have to make sure you maintain individual freedoms, despite the fact that you're willing to put an entire population of America at risk, so a certain group of people can enjoy the illusion of their privilege.
Mm-hmm.
And this is the fundamental silliness of how this government and how this country operates. This country operates on this very failed notion of individual freedom. There is no individual freedom in a situation like this.
Yep.
No, there isn't. In fact, I have a friend.
You got people that are willing to put everyone else at risk because, well, we feel like we're being treaded upon. You're not being treaded upon. You're just realizing that all the folks that you voted for over these hundreds of years now, you're really no different than the common Negro out here.
Well, see, that's the whole thing. They had their nigga moment.
Get that white privilege pass.
They had their nigga moment. Pardon the expression. I'm sorry. They had their nigga moment.
No, it's exactly true.
They saw it. That's why they bumped it. That's why they wanted the bum rush to show up there in Michigan with guns, because they realized exactly how they were being seen. And what a lot of people are not talking about, we're getting hit pretty hard here, in the inner cities, and we have black people, getting hit, but they're not talking about the effect that some of this is having in the poor red states and some of the more rural areas where people are getting hit. They're not talking about that. How people are, and how their health care is not covering them, and how they're getting torn out as well. It's not as intense as, let's say, New York City because of the populations, but those folks who are getting hit are not faring very well. So, we definitely need to look at that. And I think as far as the colleges and schools are concerned, my friend, a young lady who I'm with, her daughter is going on 20, and they're trying to. She's in St. Louis. I forget the name of the university. I keep calling it University of St. Louis, but it isn't. But she's going.
I know it. Yeah.
But anyway, she's going to school down there, and they're trying to get them all back to school and all this. And I'm like, you might want to think twice about sending her back down, because this could be a problem, for them. And now that I'm seeing that these teeny boppers are getting hit. Now I think you're just asking for a massive explosion at the university system level. You're asking for it. It's kind of reminded of 1918, where the troops were all together and they were walking around. They were young people, and it eviscerated many of them. It decimated many of them. It just did. And the 20 to 40 crowd got hit like you couldn't believe. And I kind of think this is the next phase that's coming in. 20 to 40 crowd are getting ready to get hit pretty hard. All these young teenies to let's say the more middle-aged adults in their 30s and so forth. I think that's the next phase that this thing is going to really be hitting very hard. Not to say that these people haven't gotten affected on this one, but I think they fared decently. But I think that's what's coming next. And I'm not in favor of opening up these universities right now either. I think we're asking for a lot of trouble there. But what we're doing, I think, just with opening up the country is madness. Unfortunately, I think it's just straight out madness. Mm-hmm. And, Jeff Bezos and these guys are getting sued because of they got workers there who are getting hammered. And I think they're going to get a lot of lawsuits when people start dying behind this. The lawsuits start flying. What are people going to do then?
Yeah, I deactivated my my Amazon account back when the pandemic had broke out. And I found out, that they were exploiting their workers, as essential workers and putting these people out there. I said, no way am I gonna spend my money with Amazon. Keep it.
Yeah. I mean, Bezos now saying, "Well, I'm gonna, get the PPE stuff over to my employees. I'm gonna pay for myself out of my own pocket. Don't worry, I'll take care of this myself." And I'm like, "Gee, that's mighty, Why do you, Jeff? After quite a few people have already been, exceedingly adversely affected by what's going on. And it's kind of interesting. They want to do that now. Now, since he's the head of the company, yeah, you can blame it on him. But these managers and so forth trying to pump in numbers just didn't give a damn. And Jeff, he's not micromanaging his company, so he's just letting a lot of this craziness go on. And they're being sued now. So I'm thinking, people should start suing folks now. You go to work and they make you go in there, you get torn out the frame, you should start suing them. I think these lawsuits and stuff will, one thing people respect is money. I respect people, but you start hitting them in the walls, people might start thinking a little differently.
Mhm.
I think that's what we need to start doing. No testing, people running amok, running all over the place, different strains of this virus running around.
You got this
Just
guy.
don't see what we're asking for.
You got this guy in New York City licking the pole on a train. It's unbelievable, man.
Yeah. You saw that? I'm like, dude, what's? I don't know, man.
Zaddy.
I have not seen that.
Zaddy out here.
Oh man, it's crazy, man. It's crazy. I think it was on TikTok or something like that.
Really? Wow.
This guy took his mask off with the pole, man. I said, yo, you got to punch this guy in his mouth, man. What's your PPE on, man? What's your PPE? Just knock him out.
Wow.
They took the train out of service. They have to take the train out of service.
I mean, and we're talking about, this is New York. This is the city that has the most cases of COVID-19 in the country. People don't understand right now. Let's just put these numbers in perspective. The U.S. is only the population in the U.S. is roughly about a little over 4% of the total world population.
Yep.
But we're about damn near a third of all COVID-19 cases and related deaths.
Mm-hmm.
New York City.
Is what we're looking at. This country is on track right now. Right now, we're sending over 90,000 people dead. We're looking at least 2,000 plus people that are still dying in this country every day from COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
We're just barely past the halfway point of May.
Mm-hmm.
It is feasible that by the end of next week, probably even before this, that we're going to easily hit 100,000 plus deaths, and again, this country has no answer to it. And the more that
it's about
every single day.
Think about this.
Let him finish, y'all.
Oh yeah, no. I'm sorry.
Every single day, you hear this administration comes out, and to engineering cannabis's point, because I saw it earlier. You know what? I'm not against what he's doing per se in using hydrochloric. Whatever, Jim. I can't think of the name. but anyhow, I'm not against it, but I do say I don't agree with a lot of the studies that have come out of the NIH and some of these other institutions over the past month or so, kind of shooting it down, because there's a lot of studies from Brazil and from a number of other countries that show that the earlier people are treated with oh my God, what is it called? I can't think of the name right now. Hydrochloro. Damn, what is it called? Hydrochloric. Yeah. And so there's a lot of studies that show that the earlier that the people are being treated with this drug, the better the outcomes are. Now, this is in, obviously countries where, people don't have an incentive to give you really biased data and biased studies.
Mm-hmm.
And so again, and in fact, there are studies actually going back to 2004, 2005, I believe, that actually showed, because they used hydrochloroquine to treat the original coronavirus back in China with with great success. And so there are studies that go back almost 2 decades that show that, yeah, using that is very effective. So, I mean, and again, this comes down to the earlier you introduce a person to it, the better the outcomes for them are. And so, but again, I think this is the problem. We're in a country that essentially it operates damn near like a failed state. You got a damn sitting commander in chief telling people it's okay to try to figure out how we gonna put UV light in people and eradicate disease or ingest or inject disinfectants. I mean, this is the craziness.
Mm-hmm.
I mean,
Some idiot did it. Some idiot actually drank some fish tank stuff that cleans out fish tanks that had this chemical in it.
yeah.
Some idiot did it, and they put them in a plastic bag.
Well, I gave an anecdote of a nurse on Twitter a few weeks back who, when this stuff started to happen, these talking points came out, who she had treated a patient who had gave himself a bleach enema. And you just can't believe the level of stupidity and silliness in this country. I mean, for a country that tends to pride itself on being the best, I mean, people seem to lack common sense here.
Yeah.
And I mean,
but bleach animal out. But I mean,
Public enema.
these guys are.
no, I'm just saying, like, you know, again, I just think so much of this was happening right now, man. Is just, you know, you have a country that is ill prepared, is already representing damn near a third of the total coronavirus cases and deaths, but yet, you know, no one doesn't feel the need, everyone feels the need to try to have this individual exceptionalism and individual freedom. And essentially every expert out here is saying that the second wave is going to be far worse than the first. There is no expert out here that does not agree that, yeah, we're going to be battling this for at least the next 2 to 3 years.
Yeah.
At least.
I mean, you got 8 million people in New York City. I mean, during rush hour, you don't have 2 feet damn near to between people when you're coming into the city. I mean, you can't open the city up. You can't do it. You can't. I don't know about any other big cities, but without testing people and knowing who's who and who's got what, and still there's going to be some errors in there. So you're still going to have infected people who may have tested negative or whatever. That's going to be moving in that environment. Even if you test everyone, it's still going to be somewhat a dangerous environment still. How much more are we asking for this? How much more are we asking for this with people untested? You know, we're going back to 1918, man. We're going back to that. I'm telling you, you guys just study that pandemic and look what went down. Oh man, you know, it gets covered up, but this was worse than the freaking First World War. People don't want to talk about it. It's incredible. You hear a lot of people who died during that time. They died of that. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, just as a quick point to what you were saying, Miguel. You know, earlier the talk about testing. Look, what you were saying earlier, what the doctor was saying, that people need to be tested 3-4 times. The standard protocol right now to treat for people to determine whether or not you're effectively cured of COVID-19 is you have to be tested twice within a 24-hour period. So you get the first test,
right.
You get the second test within 24 hours. 24 hours after the first one.
Right.
And so,
right.
And so right now, this country has at a minimum needs at least 1 million people tested daily. Minimum.
The last article we were reading said, "Oh, well, we're testing 1,000 people a day."
No.
I hate to laugh, but you have to laugh because it's something. Why even mention that figure? I mean, you have 300 million people in this country. You're talking about testing 1,000 people a day. You won't be able to test everybody for until 2035 at best.
That's not even your typical freshman class size at a 4-year institution. Mm-hmm. Your average freshman class size at a 4-year institution is somewhere between 2.5 to 5,000 students. Mm-hmm. I mean, 1,000 is nothing. I mean, this is the silliness, and people don't understand the scale and the scope of the situation that we're in. And unfortunately, man, even with black folks, yeah, I agreed earlier. Yeah, black folks might be getting torn out the frame, but again, the other unspoken truth about this situation is that more white people are getting torn out the frame.
Yeah.
Yeah, they are. And white people are getting lit the fuck up, and they're getting lit up all over. And they know it, but still they're pushing to go to work and everything else like that because they don't want to be perceived as niggas. We got to go to work, but people are getting hammered. I don't, somebody in the chat who said none of the worst case scenarios have come true as of yet. I mean, we haven't gotten to the worst case scenarios as of yet. That's the worst case scenarios are still yet to hit.
Do people have an understanding? Again, let's go back to the scale and scope. We're only 3 months into this.
Yeah, people. This
I mean, this is kind of the silly talk you got to deal with black folks at times, man. Negroes don't count.
Mm-hmm.
This is May. These stay-at-home orders have only been in effect since March.
Yeah.
And people are already monkeying. People are already jumping out. People are already jumping out the window, man.
You got motherfuckers jumping out. Look,
let me read this article. I'm sorry. Let me read this article. This is from the New York Times. Travel from New York City seeded wave of U.S. outbreaks. Thanks, Nagone. New York City's coronavirus outbreak grew so large.
Keep me out of it. Keep me out of this shit. Anyway.
New York City coronavirus outbreak grew so large by early March that the city became the primary source of new infections in the United States. New research reveals as thousands of infected people traveled from the city and seeded outbreaks around the country. The research indicates that a wave of infections swept from New York City through much of the country before the city began setting social distancing limits to stop the growth. That happened to fuel outbreaks in Louisiana, Texas, Arizona, and as far away as the West Coast. The findings are drawn from geneticists tracking signature mutations of the virus, travel histories of infected people, and models of the outbreak by infectious disease experts. We now have enough data to feel pretty confident that New York was the primary gateway for the rest of the country, said Nathan Grubaugh, an epidemiologist at the Yale School of Public Health. Early analysis of the genetic samples indicates that more infections across the country came from a line of the virus associated with the outbreak in New York City, shown in red, than from a line associated with the outbreak in Washington State, shown in yellow. So here's the bar graph here.
I mean, you know what that really says? You know what you're really hearing is that the official death count is much higher. That's what that's really saying.
Yep.
Because if we know that's the case, then that means people were dying from something that was unknown and no one had the answer for what the hell it was.
Mm-hmm. Right. So Wisconsin, interestingly enough, 78% coming out of what? New York. I didn't even know people in Wisconsin knew what New York was.
I can believe it. I can believe it. I can believe it. I can believe it. You know, I have no doubt about it. Mm-hmm. You know, Wisconsin is heavily populated by immigrants. A lot of European immigrants are in Wisconsin, specifically folks from Scandinavian and Germany, from Scandinavian countries and Germany. Mm-hmm. So I mean, I can absolutely believe that you will see something like that.
The central role of New York's outbreak shows that decisions made by state and federal officials, including waiting to impose distancing measures and to limit international flights, helped shape the trajectory of the outbreak and allowed it to grow in the rest of the country. The city joins other densely populated urban hotspots around the world, starting with Wuhan, China, and the Milan that have become vectors for the virus's spread. Travel from other American cities also spark infections across the country, including from an early outbreak centered in the Seattle area that seeded infections in more than a dozen states, researchers say. Even if New York had managed to slow the virus, it probably would have continued to spread from elsewhere, they say. But the Seattle outbreak proved to be a squall before the larger storm gathering in New York, where at the end of February, thousands of infected people packed trains and restaurants, thronged tourist attractions, and passed through its three major airports. During crucial weeks in March, New York's political leaders waited to take aggressive action, even after identifying hundreds of cases, giving the virus a head start. And by mid-March, when President Trump restricted travel from Europe, the restrictions were essentially pointless, the data suggests, as the disease was already spreading widely within the country. Acting earlier would most likely have blunted the virus's march across the country, researchers say. It means that we missed the boat early on, and the vast majority in this country is coming from domestic spread, said Kristen Anderson, a professor in the Department of Immunology and Microbiology at Scripps Research. I keep hearing that it's somebody else's fault. That's not true. It's not somebody else's fault. It's our own fault. Interesting. A lack of testing obscured the true extent of the outbreak for months, and officials acted on incomplete and sometimes conflicting information. The enormous growth of New York's outbreak partly reflects its volume of international visitors, especially from Europe, where most of its infections came from. Danny Lever, communications director for Governor Andrew Cuomo, criticized federal authorities, describing an enormous failure by the federal government to leave New York and the East Coast exposed to flights from Europe, while at the same time instilling a false sense of security by telling the state of New York that we had no COVID cases throughout the entire month of February. A White House spokesman, Jude Deere, said that Mr. Trump had acted quickly. The president blocked most visitors from Europe starting on March 13th, more than a month after he restricted travel from China. Just as he acted early on to cut travel from the source of the virus, President Trump was advised by his health and infectious diseases experts that he should have cut off travel from Europe, an action he took decisively without delay to save lives, while Democrats and the media criticized him and the global health community still did not fully comprehend the level of transmission or spread, Mr. Deere said. The travel that helped spread the virus includes New York residents who left the city and non-New Yorkers who visited or passed through the city. Now that infections are dispersed around the country, travel from New York is no longer a main factor shaping the progression of the epidemic, researchers said. As states around the nation begin to relax their restrictions, the findings demonstrate that it is difficult, if not impossible, to prevent those actions from affecting the rest of the nation. Look at this picture, man. You want to open up the market again to something like this? What a fucking disaster. Look at this shit. You want to open up the market to this? And for what? Ah, man. Man, oh man, oh man. Geneticists have analyzed and shared more than 2,000 samples of the virus from infected people. As the virus infects new people and replicates, it picks up mutations along the way. These mutations typically do not change the behavior of the virus, but they can provide a signature of the virus's origin. Most samples taken in Texas, Ohio, Louisiana, Idaho, Wisconsin, and many other states carry distinct mutations that can be traced back to viruses introduced into New York. Overall, Dr. Gruber estimated infections spreading from New York account for 60 to 65% of sequenced viruses across the country. The scientists said that they would like to see more samples before calculating precise figures, but they agreed that New York's prominence in seeding the national spread appears to have begun in early March, 2 weeks before stay-at-home orders were put in place. New York acted as a grand central station for the virus, with the opportunity to move from there in so many directions to so many places. David Ingelthaler, head of infectious disease branch of the Translational Genomics Research Institute in Arizona. The most commonly detected viruses tied to New York have a distinct genetic signature linking them to outbreaks in Europe. Those spreading from Washington State have a signature linking them directly to China. Benjamin M. Brown, a spokesman for the Port Authority of New York and New Jersey, which controls the airports, said that before the flight restrictions from Europe, the federal government's Customs and Borders Protection only screened passengers from China, not from Europe. Boom, there it is. So I'm not going to read this whole thing. I mean, we kind of know that New York is responsible. So when I was coming from Africa, they kept asking us about China, and I always thought that was strange that you had to voluntarily state this. I mean, you could look at anybody's passport book and see if they've been to China or not. Very strange way of benchmarking people in terms of collecting data and trying to determine where people have been and who they've been, you know, whether or not they've been in contact with somebody from Southeast Asia. I mean, I'm looking at this picture and I'm like, if you open up your markets to this, man. And this picture must have been taken back in February, March. And I'm looking and I'm saying, New York in the summertime with a virus like this, you're finished. You're highly finished, man. Ain't no way you're gonna lose a good portion of your population at the rate that it's moving. How would you be able to even stop something like that? How do you even test that many New Yorkers? I mean, New York has what, 10 to 12 million people? How are you gonna test all those people? If you're only testing 1,000 to 2,000 a day, what a disaster. I don't know, man. I don't know. I call it the way I see it. All right, let me jump to the next item on the docket. All right, this is from fastcompany.com. Black pregnant women face a mortality crisis and now a pandemic. Can tech help? Many are turning to apps, online communities, and virtual workshops to stay connected and healthy, even when faced with biased healthcare system. Dr. Phoenix knows a lot about that. I had a small breakdown the first time my midwife texted to let me know our next session would be virtual, says Leslie Lizant, who is 22 weeks pregnant. She and her husband are expecting their first child, but like many, COVID-19 had drastically shifted their plans. She still intends to deliver at home, a growing trend among Black women, hoping to avoid racial discrimination and the heightened risk of illness that accompanies COVID-19. Lizette wants to be accompanied by a midwife, a medical professional with the time to give her attentive, personalized care, answer questions, and advocate for her if needed. Lizette knows that even pre-coronavirus, Black women are 3 to 4 times more likely to die due to pregnancy-related causes than white women, and often report experiencing mistreatment during care. She found online advocacy groups and storytelling opportunities like Black Mamas Matter Alliance, unbelievable, and Natala Stories, or Natal Stories, a podcast docuseries about giving birth while Black that provide community knowledge and support when so much about birth for Black women is unpredictable. It provides peace of mind that Black women can give birth during a pandemic, that can collectively trust our bodies to birth a healthy baby, Lizette says. I have a few friends who are currently pregnant, and we are in a group chat together, sharing stories and asking questions. Only recently has research caught up to Black women's firsthand accounts of medical mistreatment and complications. Now, the Black community's disproportionate risk for COVID-19 contraction and hospitalization has elevated these concerns. The parallels between denying Black women life-saving postpartum care and withholding the larger Black community's access to vital testing and treatment for COVID-19 indicate the extent of racial inequality in healthcare. But there's reason to believe that technology platforms and tools aiming to support people during pregnancy might help reduce the risk for Black women birthing during a pandemic, only if they are built with Black women's specific needs in mind. The pandemic is already increasing the risk for Black women during childbirth. For instance, Amber Rose Isaacs died on April 21st after an emergency C-section due to being diagnosed with HELLP syndrome. I've never heard of that. An urgent pregnancy complication that affects the blood and liver just 4 days after tweeting about the incompetence of the medical team at her local Bronx hospital. New York is at it again. Isaacs had been seeking assistance for months. Her dropping platelet levels were a cause of concern, but coronavirus-related measures shifted her checkups to vital video calls. By the time care providers decided to act, it was too late. Tragically, she expressed fears that she wouldn't survive delivery to her partner. She never had the chance to meet her newborn son, Elias. Isaacs is the latest to suffer from the risk of maternal death that Black women face, and her story confirms fears that coronavirus will exacerbate an already tricky birthing climate for Black women. Dr. Jolene Sims, an OBGYN in Jackson, Mississippi, notes that despite efforts to streamline care during COVID-19, we can't cut corners in labor and delivery. High-risk patients may not be able to rely solely on telehealth. The top causes of death include heart conditions, blood clotting events, high blood pressure in pregnancy, and excessive blood loss with delivery. Each of these conditions requires patients be seen in person and evaluated in a timely fashion. We must keep this in mind and really at the forefront of our minds, because deaths related to these issues can be prevented, she says. COVID-19 may even worsen birth-related complications. Sims points out that there are higher rates of preeclampsia, eclampsia, never heard of that before, a serious high blood pressure condition that can occur after 20 weeks and after delivery in COVID-19 patients. According to Kimberly Sales Allers, an international maternal and infant health strategist and speaker, technology has the potential to improve conditions for Black birthing people, a term that includes all capable of birth, regardless of gender identity, in normal times as well as during a pandemic. That's pretty impressive. That's why SEALs, Allers started building the Earth app in 2018, which collects and shares hospital and physician reviews filtered by identity. Users enter a few details about themselves and then are able to search for reviews from people with the same racial identity, gender, religion, and income level as them. The app, which Seals Allers describes as a Yelp for experience of bias and discrimination in maternity care, seeks to combat the the impact of health providers' racial bias on Black mothers' birthing experiences. The app, partially inspired by Seals Allers' own experience of having walked away with birth trauma from a hospital that came highly recommended by her non-Black friends. She wanted to expose how quality of care changes based on identities one holds while pregnant. At the time, at that time, I was not yet married. And because I was still a graduate student, I was on student insurance, she says. And I was treated like a unwed Black woman with basic insurance. The more she traveled as a maternal and infant health advocate, the more she realized her story was painfully common among Black women. Seals Allers wants people to understand that while the act of giving birth is a biological one, the experience of giving birth is in part psychological and depends on how you're treated throughout the process. She believes that better documentation of this experience will help improve treatment during pregnancy-related care and hopefully reduce deaths. Earth is still in the prototype stage. You can download it off of GitHub. And the beta app will be finished this summer. Seals Allers plans to test it in Sacramento, Detroit, and New York City before fully launching the app in October of 2020. Seal Allers hopes Earth will give Black women a stronger voice in their reproductive care, enable non-Black women to learn about and hopefully withdraw support from facilities with a history of discrimination, and make it easier to document the specific forms of mistreatment Black women experience during care. Earth is birth, but we drop the B for bias. So when bias is no longer a factor in birth experiences, then Earth will be the reality, she explains. Seals Allers notes that while Earth was designed for Black women and birthing people, it is a tool for all marginalized groups. Now the Earth app team has ramped up the efforts online during COVID-19. Seals Allers is actively looking for survey respondents to better understand the impact of the pandemic on the treatment of women received. We already know that COVID-19 is disproportionately hitting Black and Latino communities in cases of mortality rates. We need to know how birthing experiences are also impacted, says Seals Allers. There is growing research on the number of preterm births, miscarriages, C-sections, and all the ways the act of birth is being impacted. In the face of COVID-19, many Black women are finding comfort in virtual prenatal care and mental health care. For instance, Lizette attends check-ins with both her provider and virtual group therapy. The sense of community that online groups and forums bring, especially when paired with resources like Earth app, provides them with the tools to navigate the challenge of birthing during both a pandemic and a national mortality crisis. That's actually a pretty ass Black woman. One such resource is the Renee, which hosts an informal hackathon-like opportunities called jam sessions, where women of color from across the country share both stories and brainstorm solutions to make their pregnancy and birth experiences better. Eventually, the Renee's founder, Whitney Robinson, hopes to compile these insights into an online resource. Robinson is well acquainted with the systematic factors that limit Black birthers' access to quality healthcare and facilities and providers, including how prolonged exposure to racism-related stress deteriorates Black people's bodies on a cellular level, a process referred to as weathering. On April 19th, Robinson had a virtual jam session on anti-weathering as a direct response to COVID-19, helping provide women of color with the opportunity to prioritize themselves despite the demands of the pandemic. During the inaugural session, participants prepared a custom recipe of sweet potato flatbread with caramelized onion and colored pesto that was developed by local preservationist Gabrielle Etienne. Robinson arranged for the delivery of fresh ingredients from the Black farmers of Tall Grass Food Box. For each of the session's 5 participants, they shared a meal while sharing stories. Another anti-weathering jam session on May 28th will feature politician Stacey Abrams. Oh God. I don't have a lot of time to read this rest of this article. But it is in the document in the description beneath the video for you to follow along with. So if you want to read it for yourself, it's actually worth a read. All right, let me jump to the next item on the docket.
Before you do that, my bad,
Yes,
brother.
sir.
Before
Yes,
you
sir.
do that.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, I don't really have much to say on this. I got pretty strong opinions on this because I think there's a whole lot that's being left out in that article.
Mhm.
But if you go back to December, you remember that one talk we did on maternal fetal health, and again, I mean, this pretty much highlights a number of things that we discussed in that particular live stream. But also in general, to be just really frank, when it comes to Black women and maternal fetal health, there's 2 specific things that are taking place. One, a lack of family planning, because most of these pregnancies tend to be unplanned. 2, a lack of support from the partner. This is what typically differentiates Black women from other groups of women who are pregnant and who don't experience those high rates of infant mortality and poor maternal health outcomes during and after pregnancy. And so I'll just leave it at that because I think this is kind of a can of worms here. So I don't want to get you brothers in trouble, but I'll leave it at that.
No, but it's good. At least they're talking about it, right? In the manosphere, typically you don't hear these kind of conversations, but it gives me hope that at the very least, you still have a level of consciousness against with some sisters out here who are actually leveraging tech to actually get this information out, right? I don't see many people having these discussions in the manosphere or even in the woman's sphere for that matter.
Well, and again, because these kind of conversations require a level of accountability and honesty among Black women in relation to how Black women's mating habits are, who are you picking, in general, your health. And this requires a fundamental level of honesty from Black women that, unfortunately, at least in my experience, that
You are absolutely
most
correct.
Black women have been unwilling to engage in.
Absolutely.
That's just my experience.
Family planning plays a big role in this, and the lack of it, and the single mother kind of haphazard, baby dropping syndrome has not played well into that. And that's a very realistic thing. You got to look at that and deal with it head on. And that's a factor. Dr. Phoenix is 1,000,000,000% correct on that. Sorry, but folks may not want to tackle that, but you have to deal with that. Yeah. Very real.
To this next item on the docket from Bloomberg. This was sent by BGS. Thanks, Black Gnostic Speaks. The pandemic will reduce inequality or make it worse. Oh man, can't believe this is behind the paywall. Thought I'd pay for this. A recession is no picnic. A financial crisis leaves wounds that last for decades. A pandemic, though, can sow a unique kind of chaos. The Black Death took a highly stratified medieval society and turned it upside down. With 75 million dead, Europe's wealthy landowners couldn't find enough people to tend their fields. When peasants, the essential workers of the day, demanded higher pay, the elites of the 14th century fought back with punitive laws, forced labor, and taxes. Even so, wages for the lowliest workers soared. In rural England, they doubled. Um, this is behind a paywall. I don't understand why it's not working. I could have swore I played for Bloomberg a minute ago. Anyways, I think they're making a very good point. You see the essential workers out there right now, basically being exploited during the pandemic, and we know that most of the people who are working as essential workers on the front line tend to be melanated people, and they're highly exploited out there. So, all right, we're getting close to the end. All right, this next one is from the BostonReview.net. We're not all in it together. A public health emergency does to a society what a stress test does to a bank or the human body. It reveals, among other things, weakness and vulnerabilities that have built up over time. The novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2 has done the same for the U.S. Society through the particular path of its devastation. It serves as a stark reminder of America's deep, far-reaching economic and race-based inequalities, placing some segments of society in a privileged position while limiting the agency and life prospects of others. The virus has simply illuminated this reality again. It remains to be seen whether the crisis it has created lays the groundwork for the future, for future political debate, or better yet, political changes that reduce these social economic inequities. But we will not be able to claim that COVID-19 did not give us the opportunity to reflect on what sort of society we live in, where the gains go and why they go where they do. We would all wish, of course, that the opportunity had not arrived in this terrible form. Still, the pandemic does provide an occasion for stock taking, and perhaps a new politics helps fix some of what ails us. The virus has cut a path of destruction through U.S. Society in short order. Infections have soared, as have deaths. The first positive tests were reported in Washington State on January 20th. As of this writing, nearly 1.5 million people have been infected. And less than 3 months after the first fatality, the death toll was approaching 90,000, with One Health Research Center, the University of Washington's Institute for Health Metric and Evaluation, estimating that it would exceed 135,000 by early August. And you want to open up the market. Not long after COVID-19 made its appearance in the United States, many hospitals were overwhelmed. Ventilators were in short supply. Doctors and nurses worked frantically to save lives while risking their own because they lack basic protective gear, such as gloves, gowns, and masks. The layoffs started quickly as well and accelerated at a breakdown pace. By now, 36 million workers have filed for unemployment benefits, nearly twice as many as had in late March and slightly more than a fifth of the entire workforce. At the point, there were more than 6 million new jobless claims a week, a tenfold increase over the previous record, 700,000 in 1982. The crashed websites and jammed phone lines at unemployment offices compounded the anxiety experienced by the unemployed. The unemployment rate, 3.7% in February, skyrocketed to 14.7% by the end of April. It may well be higher. James Bullard, chair of the St. Louis Federal Reserve Bank, estimates that it could eventually approach 30%, something not seen since the Great Depression. The similarities don't end there. Just like the Great Depression, which evokes of long lines of soup kitchens, the country's food pantries have been besieged by hungry people. Photographs show hundreds, in some cases, thousands of cars lined up around the nation seeking food, aid, and other basic household goods. Surveys revealed that in April, a fifth of all households, only 40% of those containing children under 12, lack sufficient food. Many have exonerated, many have exasperated the U.S. Government for allowing this to happen in the world's wealthiest country. Laurie Garrett, the public health expert who sounded the warning early, said that she hadn't been surprised by the virus's worldwide rampage or the failure of many countries to curb it. But that the one thing she had not expected was the US government's inept response. She isn't alone. The journalist, George Packer, lamented that the United States had become a failed state. It's something that Nagona 11 said earlier. A label usually applied to anarchy places like Somalia or Yemen, surveying the healthcare system's response to the pandemic and the economic devastation that has been made worse by the absence of strong social safety nets to protect the vulnerable. The Nobel Prize winning economist Joseph Stiglitz likened the US to a third world country. These labels may be dramatic, but they aren't hyperbolic. The COVID-19 outbreak reveals an unfortunate, long-withstanding truth. There are deep, growing divisions in US society, and they have an outsized effect in determining who suffers from this pandemic as well as how the government responds. The COVID-19 pandemic reveals just how much inequality can determine the degree to which crises disrupt people's lives. For starters, like the likelihood of catching the disease and denying and dying from it depends on a person's wealth, profession, and race. Households with income in the top 20% and people who have college degrees are more likely to work in the cocoon of the Zoom economy. They can engage in social distancing while continuing to work from home, while sitting in front of a computer that means higher income workers have lower odds of being infected and, importantly, lower odds of being laid off. They also generally have more money saved up for hard times, which enables them to better manage getting sick, losing their jobs, or both. Many Americans are far less fortunate. They cannot work off-site, nor do their jobs while adhering to social distancing guidelines. Some, such as doctors, are well paid, but tens of millions of others who are at high risk of contracting COVID-19 have incomes well below the national median. Many have service providing jobs that pay low wages, and some baristas, servers, hotel staff, and people who deliver food from restaurants rely on tips as an essential supplement. Janitors are making an average of $15 an hour. Others with low income who are vulnerable to infection include taxi and bus drivers, grocery store clerks, meat packers, and fruit and vegetable pickers. Those working in one of the hardest hit segments of the US economy, leisure and hospitality and retail sales, make the lowest average wages of all non-farm workers. In short, millions of people who hold a variety of jobs simply can't afford to stay home and tend to do work that provides a low income. From the start of the pandemic through the end of April, in fewer than 3 months, 16.6 million of these jobs disappeared from 20 economic sectors, nearly half from hospitality and food services and the retail trade. Low wages are just the start. Many people who hold low wages also have fewer guaranteed benefits or none at all. They are less likely to receive paid sick leave or to have health insurance. Households making less than $50,000 are 3 times less likely to have insurance than those making over $125,000. And people in low-paying jobs are much less likely to have the savings needed to ride out prolonged unemployment. For households that reported savings, the median amount in mid-2018 was $2,000 for those in the bottom quintile of the national income distribution, and $10,630 for those in the next highest quintile. That compares to $568,030 for those in the top decile and 1.6 million in the top 1%. According to a Federal Reserve Bank study, 40% of working Americans lack rainy day savings to cover an unanticipated expense of $400. 40%. Another report by J.B. Morgan Chase found that 65% of working adults lack the buffer of 6.2 weeks of worth of after-tax pay to manage a sudden drop in income accompanied by an unanticipated jump in expenses. Moreover, 48% did not have readily available savings totaling 2.6 weeks of net earnings to handle a reduction in income, even if they were not faced with unforeseen bills. They would have to borrow the money or fall back on credit cards. Yet the average emergency room bill was $1,389 in 2017. In an average monthly health insurance premiums, if someone has to pay their own way, exceeds $600.
Hey, Mike, they're talking about this is across the board. This is amongst all kind of ethnic groups. Is that what they're saying?
Well, again, I think, yeah, they're saying, I think it's just saying all ethnic groups, but I think they're mostly focusing on Black and brown people in this article.
Okay, because that's kind of what I wanted to find out. Okay, all right.
Yep. That may explain why in May 2018 survey, 9% stated that they had declared bankruptcy at some point due to medical expenses, and 20% recalled that a family member had been contacted within the past 12 months by a collection agency because of an unpaid medical bill. And that, mind you, was prior to COVID-19 arrival. Even when low-income workers have employer-provided health care, they are particularly burdened by the rising cost of deductibles, which averaged $3,500 per individual in 2018, a 150% increase within a decade. Medicaid does help people with low incomes, depending on where they live and the type of care they are seeking. But the percentage of doctors who accept it varies considerably. Nationally, 70.8% of doctors accepted new patients covered by Medicaid versus 89.8% for those relying on Medicare and 90.8% for the privately insured. Unemployment benefits help if you are laid off, but how much it will help depends on your ability to access the benefits where you live. States' limit vary considerably, where many states provide 26 weeks of benefits. Arkansas and South Carolina provide 20, Alabama 14, Missouri 13, and North Carolina and Florida was only 12. That's 3 months of support for workers who have already been out of work since early March. The clock is already ticking for many of those 3 million workers displaced at the very start of the crisis. On top of that, unemployment benefits generally cover less than half of a person's lost income and total $300 to $400 per week. Then there's the $2.2 trillion CARES Act passed by Congress in March, which provides an extra buffer. 13 additional weeks after workers have reached the maximum duration for unemployment allowed in their state plus, another $600 a week until July 31st, $1,200 for individuals with incomes under $75,000, $2,400 for those filing jointly and making less than $150,000, and $500 per child under age 16, for a maximum of $3,400 for households with additional children. But here, too, it's clear that another check from the federal government won't be enough to offset the lost incomes. In deeper vulnerabilities of the country most disadvantaged, much more could have been done. What we got instead was legislation that was weighed down and all too predictably be by a bevy of goodies for the wealthy and politically powerful. The Paycheck Protection Program, for example. The PPP has colossally misallocated financial resources. Its $340 billion was meant to help small businesses keep workers on the payroll, covering wages and benefits costs for 8 weeks during the crisis. Yet vast sums went to major national name brands instead of the mom and pop shops that were promised assistance. Penske Automotive Group and Auto Nation, mammoth automobile dealerships, each of which has over $22 billion in revenues and more than 20,000 employees, got funds from the PPP by parsing the program's language to make the case that individual franchises should be counted as small businesses. 3 publicly traded hotel conglomerates, Ashford Incorporated, Ashford Hospitality Trust, and Brahma Hotels and Resorts, use the same maneuver.
Hey, Mike. Yo, Mike, can you hear me?
Yeah, Ray, you got to put some volume on the joint.
Oh, my bad. Hey, I just wanted to add a little point to that. What you just mentioned there.
Mhm.
So what they did was there was a loophole. It's what they did was they put it in the legislation to define small business as it relates to these PPP loans and stuff. They got it to define small business as any business that has less than 300 employees per location. So that means you could be a huge company with a chain, right? Across the United States. As long as each location has under 300 employees or under a certain number, it's quote unquote a small business.
Well, would they define that maybe because that large business that has these different small locations, would they be considered franchises where they would be considered a small business? You know, because Penske and these companies are, you know, they have a lot of different locations, but that's a big giant company. And the government was complaining about some of the companies that had all this money that they shouldn't have gotten were asking to get a lot of, you know, for these guys to give some of this money back.
Yeah.
And they were, and a lot of these companies have actually refused. And I think, I don't know if the government is going to look to press for charges on these guys or whatever, but they're asking to get money back from them because of what Michael, you know, was just talking about.
Yeah.
So this franchise game that you're talking about, if they're looking at each location as a separate business.
A separate business, yes. Think about it. Hertz,
a separate independent business, independent from that of the corporation that they own. Is it a franchise or? See that
they defined it as a business that's operating in a certain municipality, right? See, so as a whole, you can't hit Hertz, for example, right? The car, let's just use Hertz, the car rental place. So if Hertz is in Fresno, California, right? Okay, and that Hertz has 20 employees, 25 employees. Okay, well, technically speaking, that's a business that has 25 employees, just like any other business that would be in the Fresno area that had 25 employees, right? Technically speaking, the difference is that Hertz is actually a multinational. I mean, it's a huge corporation. Yeah, their singular location has 25 people, but come on, you and I both know there's a difference between that business and its 25 employees versus like the you know, like the sort of like the homegrown packing and distribution company that's got a crew of 20. It's a night. We're talking, you know, night and day difference here in terms of business operations. Man, Hertz is a huge company.
Hey, let me finish this article. Not surprisingly, then New York City hospitals battling COVID-19 in areas that are poor and have high concentration of minority, the two overlap significantly, have been burdened much more by shortages of medical equipment and staff than their counterparts in high-income locales. Minority groups tend to live in areas with more air pollution, those close to refineries, rail yards, and automobile repair shops, for example. As a result, they suffer disproportionately from respiratory ailments, such as asthma. That in turn increases the risk of dying if they contract COVID-19. Based on a study of 3,000 counties in the United States, researchers at Harvard's T.H. Chan School of Public Health found that even small variations in the concentration of fine particulate matter make a huge difference in COVID-19 death rates. Infection rates have also been much higher in neighborhoods with a higher population density where minorities are more likely to be concentrated. Furthermore, hospitals in poor and minority neighborhoods are generally less well equipped and also have fewer doctors relative to the population compared to wealthier areas. And hospitals and doctors are far more likely to close up shop in poor urban areas where many patients are on Medicare or Medicaid or lack insurance altogether in order to chase after the more affluent and privately insured ones. So no one should be shocked by studies reporting that Blacks, relative to their proportion of the population in various localities, are substantially overrepresented among COVID-19 hospitalizations. In New York City, the pandemic epicenter, people in the bottom 25% of the income distribution accounted for 36% of all COVID-19 cases, compared to 20% of the wealthiest 25%, and the death rate per thousand for Blacks and Hispanics was twice that of whites. New York pattern is replicated. New York's pattern is replicated in other big cities and states. Minorities' risk of dying once they're infected by the virus far exceeds that of whites. In Mississippi, Blacks accounted for 61% of COVID-19 deaths, even though they make up only 38% of the population. In Louisiana, the corresponding numbers are 70 and 33%. And in Washington and Wisconsin, 33 and 7%. So in Wisconsin, they only make up 7% of the population, but make up 33% of the deaths.
I think that's what Dr. Phoenix was talking about before. You mentioned that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we're talking about a state that's 90+% white. So to just put that in perspective.
Similarly,
These devastating numbers. Anyway, go ahead, Mike. I'm sorry.
Similarly, because they live in communities with overcrowded housing, inadequate healthcare, and a proportionately greater incidence of diabetes and heart disease, Native Americans are at high risk for infection and death relative to much of the rest of the country. On top of that, at a time when we are reminded repeatedly that the best way to keep the virus at bay is by washing our hands, Native Americans are 9 times less likely to have running water at home than households in the rest of the country. They are not alone. Nationwide, over 2 million are in the same predicament. For them, an essential elementary precaution that most Americans take for granted represents an ever-present obstacle. So for the same people who want to talk about running water in Africa, there are many places in the United States that don't have running water.
Just to add in a point about the Native Americans, again, I'm in Wisconsin, and Wisconsin has a fairly sizable Native American population, although I will argue a good portion of them are probably $5 Indians, but we're not going to go there.
Yeah, sure.
But anyone that's ever been on these reservations, I mean, these things are like internment camps. These things are pretty much just containment camps. That's pretty much all they are. I mean, you go there. I mean, most folks are alcoholics. Extremely high rates of diabetes, cardiovascular disease. Issues with running water, plumbing. I mean, everything. If you go on many of these reservations, I mean, they're pretty damn horrible. The way people live. So yeah. Anyone's familiar with that. So yeah, I just throw it out there. So I mean, again, we got we see scenarios where in this country, although it claims to be a first world country, you see where you have various sectors of the country where there's really more or less third world conditions that people find themselves living in.
Very accurate. We talk about this all the time about how America has a first world and a third world effect, and many of these are in the states. Many of these states are third world. White third world states are West Virginia. Shit is third world. You go up in the mountains in some areas of Kentucky and in these states, Arkansas and so forth, where you actually can go up into these up into the mountains, and you're living like a mountain man, and you're in some of these recessed areas, or even areas that are not that fully recessed, but are just a little off the grid. They're not in the big wealthier, wider areas, and these places have shacks that are tar huts, if you will, no running water, outhouses, and all that. Still to this day, you see that in these areas to this day. To this day, white areas, black areas, Mississippi, Alabama, and these people where people have ringworm and this kind of stuff. Ringworm is still a problem. No running water still, or poor plumbing and all. You've got a massive third world effect here in this country. It's massive, massive, and we still have certain levels of starvation going on in this country that we don't talk about. So, which is an obscenity, literally under the eyes of God. But areas of of COVID and so forth, you're really seeing where. And I've been reading a lot of articles where they've been talking about COVID has been coming down, and it's been hitting straight down the socioeconomic lines, and we're seeing who's getting hit the hardest and who isn't, and it's coming right down. It's coming right down those lines, right down those, and that's being painfully exhibited now, which to me politically should if people would politically could galvanize, we could really move some things differently in this country based on what we're seeing here with this COVID. I don't know if that's going to happen, but to make a great case for a national healthcare system that would work for people all around is something that we sorely need if we care about people. But once again, I think at the very heart of this country, we don't care about people. We care about other things. And certainly poor people and the minority folks are by no means any type of priority here in this on this nation's agenda, which is horrifying, but that's where we are, and this virus is showing it. It's just uncovering that in some very naked and ugly ways.
All right, let me get to the last item on the docket. This is from bostonglobe.com. With or without a mask, communities of color fear unequal enforcement during pandemic. On Wednesday, Massachusetts becomes the latest state to require that residents wear masks or face coverings to combat the coronavirus. And announcing his executive order last week, Governor Charlie Baker said, "We view it as common sense." When the Reverend Irene Monroe heard that, she asked, "To whom?" No relation to David Monroe. I see it, maybe it's extreme, as an unstated sanctioned form of stop and frisk by cops of vulnerable populations like Black and brown people, said Monroe, a longtime civil rights activist and co-host of All Revved Up on WGBH. It troubles me because it's a no-win situation, she said. There's criminalization if you use a mask. There's non-compliance if you don't have one. It's insidious. There's a quagmire it puts us in, an added stressor in trying to survive a pandemic, in which even its guidelines don't have us in the equation. I think Dr. Phoenix had mentioned that earlier, that Black people don't count. Masks will be required in place places where maintaining 6 feet of social distancing is not possible, Baker said. The order excludes children under 2 years old, anyone unable to wear a mask due to a medical condition, or those otherwise exempt from State Department of Health guidelines. Failure to comply with the mask requirements can result in a civil fine up to $300, though the governor says enforcement will be left up to cities and towns. Several communities, including Somerville, Cambridge, Lawrence, and Watertown, have also have $300 fines, but more stringent requirements than the state, demanding masks even when social distancing is possible. In Peabody and Winthrop, punishment for non-compliance can be as high as $1,000. These are very racist places. For those of you who don't know, Peabody and Winthrop, racist places, man.
I was gonna say, Mike, that's in your neck of the woods, huh?
Yeah, it's all my neck of the woods. Nationwide, some Black men have been harassed and handcuffed for wearing masks as protection. Suspects simply for trying to adhere to an order. Last month, 6 senators, including Ed Markey of Massachusetts, sent a letter to Attorney General William Barr and Christopher Wray, the FBI's director, stating, "We urge your agency to immediately provide training and guidance on bias, policing, and disproportionate or selective enforcement during the COVID-19 pandemic." I myself have been harassed the last few weeks for having a mask on. So I know what they're saying is true. Okay?
Wait, for having one on?
Yeah.
I saw them take some guys out of a store, 2 Black guys. It was a video. The 2 Black guys walked in, they had their masks on. The police officer or the security guy came over and said, "You guys can't come in here with these on, man."
Yeah.
Everybody, you had to wear a mask,
What the fuck? Really?
told them you couldn't come in there with masks. I guess they thought these guys. To me, it was so crazy, which shows you the absolute madness of and the psychotic nature of this racism that these savages are running with. That here you are in the middle of a disease. They said you can't come here with these masks.
Yeah.
Like these guys. I mean, like these guys were criminals. Insane.
Right,
Insane.
and then in other places, they're fucking accosting you for not having a mask on.
It's these people are sick. They're insane.
Yeah, I had a black mask, and I got harassed for having it. I switched to a white N95 mask, and I've been okay since. So it's
Goddamn colorist mask people.
Oh yeah, man, light skin mask.
Light skin mask.
Well, I normally go out wearing my N95, and you do get those looks.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
Definitely get those looks. And unfortunately, I don't know what to say about the situation. I mean, what we're seeing here is that you're seeing the very fabric of this country being exposed.
Yes.
And at its core, it's just pure ugliness, man. It's just straight. It's white supremacy at its core.
It's evil. It's evil, man. The
Yeah.
Medusa, man. Fucking Medusa, man. That's what you're seeing. Savagery.
Yeah.
Gotta read this book, White Trash, man, by Eisenberg. Eisenberg. It's oh boy. It breaks these folks down, man. It breaks it down hardcore. Breaks it down. Anyway, go ahead, man. Just breaks it down hardcore.
No, I was just gonna say I'm familiar with the book. Have not read it, but I am quite familiar with it. There's another book, how the Irish became white.
Mhm.
Very interesting read along the same line. So look, at the end of the day, as this relates to Black folks, what we're seeing here with Black folks is that at its core, Black folks have their issues. But really, what the coronavirus has done is really truly expose just the levels of inequity in this country, and specifically inequities as it relates to Black people and how Black people are specifically affected in this system. Again, we know that Black people, one have far less access to healthcare. 2, those that do have jobs that do provide healthcare, you are paying these high deductible premiums for these insurance plans, I mean, that's pretty much what every organization is moving to. You're paying high deductibles.
Yep.
Or at least $1,000.
Yep. I told him to go on 11 then.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so, I mean, then you couple that with the fact that, you know, what we've been seeing for the last month or so now, you got white supremacists taking over the Capitol buildings. People, they're coming in Capitol buildings with guns. Nothing is being said. Hell, you barely see a police presence. I could not imagine a scenario had that been some brothers in wearing black masks over their mouths.
Oh, you can imagine that
coming in with AR-15s, and you don't see the National Guard sitting right there waiting for them.
Yeah.
Well. They did escort a black female woman, state senator. I think it maybe some state senator, but she was under some pressure from those folks, and she came in with an armed guard. This is in Michigan. Armed guard brothers. They came out there. They were strapped like bamboo, and no one attacked them. So then they waited on the state house stairs with their weapons as well, and they didn't get messed with. So apparently,
I saw that photo on Twitter.
Yeah. So they were armed. They they were ready for Freddy, as they say. So he was no one attacked them. So I guess maybe they would look crazy trying to attack these guys when when the mayonnaise boys ran up in there, like Bonnie and Clyde. It was I don't think they could have justified coming down these guys.
Yeah, black and brown people are also being criminalized for not donning masks. Last month, a black man in Philadelphia was dragged by police from a bus because he was not wearing a mask as required by the city.
Where was this, Mike?
This is New York? Philadelphia, the voice of the everyday brother. After the incident went viral, officials amended the requirement. In New York last weekend, a severe contrast in policing was again evident. In parks, lots of white people, not all wearing masks or practicing social distancing, relaxed undisturbed in the sun. Elsewhere in the city, people of color were roughed up as police investigated violations of mask and social distancing requirements. A young black man who verbally defended the group was threatened with a taser, then pulled to the ground by an officer who punched him and planted his knee in his back.
What the fuck?
Yeah, it's just going on. It's crazy over here, man.
God damn.
Mayor Bill de Blasio of New York called the video disturbing. That's what excessive, unequal policing looks like for people of color, and the coronavirus is amplifying it. To be clear, Monroe supports efforts to slow the spread of the coronavirus.
Oh, wait, surprise. But de Blasio thinks it's surprising in New York. Surprising.
Well, he thinks it's disturbing.
Or I'm sorry, disturbing. Yeah, okay.
Kind of like you put your phone on do not disturb, like you don't want it to vibrate or ring or anything like that, I guess.
Yeah.
For weeks, she has had an intimate and heartbreaking view of the pandemic as she has officiated the funerals for victims of COVID-19, many of them people of color. As is the inevitable case nationwide, the disease is infecting and killing a disproportionate number of Black and brown Massachusetts residents. The grim fact, that grim fact is a direct result of this nation's entrenched and systemic racism. Those same factors can feed the unequal enforcement of guidelines ostensibly designed to keep us all safe. I'm already doing funerals, a lot of them for Black and brown people as a consequence of COVID-19, Monroe said. I don't want enforcement of this mandatory requirement to wear masks to be another deadly consequence of COVID-19. Of course, masks are necessary in this pandemic, yet a remedy that's a mild inconvenience for some can become, if enforced disproportionately, as potentially harmful in communities of color as the disease itself. Yeah, I got harassed, man. I got harassed for having my mask on. So I switched out, man, and got. I have several dozen masks, anyways. I was trying to keep my my N95s from being used, but they forced me to break out the N95. So
Yeah, you gotta go with the light skin mask.
yeah.
Damn, Mike, where did they harass you at?
Oh, CVS, Whole Foods, yeah, they come for you, man. They really come for you.
So
So
you went in
the article is telling the truth.
So you went in there and what they tell you, they tell you, hold it, nigga. What are you getting ready to do in here?
No. You get pushed to the back of the line, or you get kind of stopped, or it's a disaster. It looks just like this picture. This picture is an accurate depiction of what people are going through.
Oh shit!
It's an accurate depiction of what people are going through.
That's fucking crazy, man.
Yeah.
Oh shit!
Yeah. So the article is bang on the money. I didn't want to say much on these live streams that this is what people are going through. Black people are being harassed for not having masks, and then being harassed for having a mask.
No, I saw a video.
It's like you damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah, I saw a video where they harassed two brothers walking in, and then these guys they weren't criminal minded. These were easygoing cats, and some savage rolled up to him, was like, "Yo, hold on." They were like, "What? Y'all have to leave. Y'all have to leave the store. We're trying to be safe." Nah, y'all got on masks. Y'all have to leave the store.
Yeah. Especially if you're out of a car with tinted windows, man. People are real, the cops are real issue about that, man. What's this guy doing? Where's he going? Into an ATM?
It's crazy. Jesus.
Got an Infinity Q50? Tinted windows?
Oh, you so petty.
Yeah, you crazy, man. You crazy, dog. Oh, the Q45. Anyway, yeah, man. Yeah, you bugging.
Nah, he has a Q50. He has a Q50 with all-wheel drive. So get
Q497.
Nah, man. If you got a black mask, man, they will come for you, man. I don't know what it is about the black mask on black men. It seems to really, really trigger people, man. Especially women too. Women grabbing their purses, like, nigga, what do you think I'm gonna do?
I guess it's the movies or something. I mean, the media has been so savage on us for such a long time. It just gives a natural. That's just their response.
Mm-hmm.
Just like I'd be looking at like, honey, you got nothing I want, man. Get out of my sight.
Yeah, social distancing, man. We already keeping arm's length 6 feet. What more do you want, man?
Mm-mm-mm.
Yeah, you got
Mask on, mask off. God damn.
Yeah.
Mm-mm. Terrifying.
Yeah, women always keep their mask on, like somebody else said, man. So I don't know what's gonna come from this, man. I know somebody got shot a few weeks ago. I didn't report it on here, but somebody got shot. No social distancing.
6 feet, bro.
Yeah,
6 feet.
6 feet, bro. Back up, man.
Back up, man. 6 feet.
Yeah, banging on like a drum, man. Bang, bang, bang.
Back up, fam.
Back up, fam. 6 feet, bro.
Yeah, somebody got
6 feet, fam.
Because you don't know. See, the thing in the black community is that everybody's a tough guy. And so you don't know who's running up on you, who's walking up on you, man. That lack of social distancing, that's a problem, man. All you see is a nigga with his eyes looking at you. Like, man, I roll my blue blockers everywhere I go, man.
Yeah, so do I.
Damn, man.
You got the dudes on dirt bikes running around with masks on with no helmet though, looking crazy.
What?
Yeah.
This is wild, man. This is wild.
Yeah. So it's the black community is a big mess, and COVID has just opened up.
I mean, it literally has just, yeah, it kind of gave motherfuckers a reason to just be like.
No, I say it literally tore the lid off.
Yeah.
So you're looking right at everything now. You just tore the lid clean off.
I don't know, man. I still think testing still needs to be done.
Absolutely.
People are not getting any testing done at all. That's part of the issue. People are just kind of in limbo. Like the article, the last 3 articles pointed out, the healthcare and healthcare inequities and insurance coverage and so on and so forth have basically marginalized Black people to the back of the line, man. While the United States is talking about human rights violations in China with the Uyghurs and the lack of testing with them, and during the pandemic,
It's always a goddamn human rights violation somewhere else, right?
well, is the pot calling the kettle black? Black people are the more disproportionately.
Literally.
Yeah, Black people are more disproportionately likely to be infected and die from it than any other group in this country. And you got the United States pointing the finger at China, talking about, your Uyghurs down there. And he's like, China man's looking back like your niggers.
What about your niggers down there?
Yeah, your nakers. So
your nakers.
Yeah, man.
Damn.
You think Trump would just kind of keep his mouth shut, man? The Trump administration was trying to keep their mouth shut, man, on this, man, without actually looking like fools. You got Black people being harassed for wearing masks, being harassed without wearing masks, not wearing gloves, things like that, man.
It's showing you this country, to a large extent, it's a sick. The issues we have, they become sicknesses, and it's gotten way out of control. You look at Germany, you're looking at North Korea, you look at these places, they've handled their game so much differently, and all these issues we have with people and race and it just this country's just all fucked up.
I had read this article just today about how Germany, what things that Germany did to basically secure its employment base through all of this. So Germany is one of these countries where they haven't had nearly as many people take a hit from an employment standpoint from this, because of how they have, just infrastructurally, this is like, again, this whole COVID thing that you and Mike and going, you guys are saying, just taking the lid off a lot of shit. And because of this, you really just start to see just kind of like how kind of gumshoe a lot of countries, and including this one, has been largely been operating.
You see how ineffective our systems are. You're seeing how
exactly
the pure capitalist nature and its deep down hateful, its hateful nature really is really coming out. How we're getting a poor result, and how we call ourselves this indispensable nation, and and American exceptionalism and all that. It's a crock of shit. This country's a cess. It's an air conditioned cesspool, and we need to start cleaning it out. We need to start cleaning this thing up right, and that's where we are. That is where we are. It's hard to look at it like this, but this is literally, in some respects, hell with the lid off right now. This is a very, very terrible look. A very terrible look. And to have Black people, Latinos, and others, at this level, getting hit like this, and other poor folks, where it's coming down a lot of economic lines. This is just, you can't call this a civilized country with this going on. You can't call this place really civilized.
Oh, real shit, Nicole.
What was that?
No, that's it, man. I'm done.
No, he's good.
Oh man, look in the chat, see what. Yeah, interesting to see Miss J has shown up over here.
She said she was lurking. She's been lurking, man. I shouted her out and I said, welcome.
Yeah, actually,
she said she'd been lurking around for a good minute. But she also said that this is something that the topic kind of hits close to home in terms of her family. I don't know, maybe like on a future COVID, discussion, because we're going to continue to have these as this stuff is an issue.
Mhm.
So, maybe, Ms. J would want to join us for a future discussion and, talk about how this has impacted her, because that's really what she was, I was working, but I just had the phone and I just, was in the chat for a little bit. Yeah, so she was saying that she had, I guess in her family or something, and been impacted by this. So it's good to see her here.
Yeah, I think a lot of families have been impacted by this.
Yeah.
Like Dinah Samir, Search for Who, he's a.
I know.
survivor.
He was diagnosed with it, right? Or
Yeah, he was impacted by it. So he,
yeah.
how is
How is he? I mean, I don't. I check him out every so often, but has he spoke about it?
He's healthy now. He's healthy now.
He's good. He's good. Okay, good. That's good to hear, man. That's good to hear.
Yeah, a little bit of muscle milk kind of helped him out there. So,
Seems like most people who get it seem to recover.
well, he's pretty young too. He's pretty young himself.
He's
so.
young. Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, did he go into any details, like where he may have thought he might have kind of came in contact with this?
It's in his live stream. How he, battled COVID. So.
Okay. I'll try to go check it out.
Yeah, definitely. Shalom, everyone.